Newman. Assemblymember Friedman. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Douglas, could you please read how the public participates in today's meeting and all of the instructions as to whether or not they can participate by phone if they've had to be evacuated due to the wildfires or other situations today?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, if for some reason you're evacuated and cannot be on your computer for the meeting, there is a call-in option. There's instructions on the first page of our agenda, but also while you're on the webinar, there's an option to click over to a phone call mode. If you open the audio tab, it gives you those instructions. And if you can join that before you turn off your computer, that's the ideal situation. But again, there are call-in numbers available on the first page of our agenda. You can join via your phone in the webinar mode, or you can also just call and listen in if so desired. This is day 2 of the August 2021 virtual CTC meeting. The CTC exists to make transportation funding, planning, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our meetings normally take place in diverse locations around the state so the commissioners can see firsthand a variety of infrastructure issues around California. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The Commission's meeting agenda is available on our website, and you can access that at any time and download it for your own personal use. For this meeting, there is live closed captioning, Spanish language, and American Sign Language translations available. You can access these services through links found on our meetings page under the August 18th, 19th meeting heading. Commissioners, should you have any questions or comments during a meeting, please let us know by raising your hand or otherwise get our attention on camera and wait for the chair to call on you. You can also send inquiries and comments through the questions tab that can be read to presenters and the audience on your behalf. Please mute your microphones except when you intend to speak to minimize outside noise and feedback. The chair will do her best to call on each of you in turn. We hope that you will turn on your camera while speaking if you have one. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, every vote will need to be a roll call vote. Staff will group items for votes to help save time. Please only speak when called upon. When called upon, please state your name and briefly make your point so the public knows who's making those comments. I would please ask that no one speak a second time on any one item until everyone who wishes to speak a first time has done so. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. We hope that you also turn on your camera during your presentation if you have one. To the members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give this system time to acknowledge you. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar control panel likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, questions, and handouts tab. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer computer option, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, select the corresponding box, dial the phone number, access code, and audio pin as directed by the system. And again, that's what you'll want to do if you need to switch over to phone option in case of an emergency. Please note that if the audio pin is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the Commission should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants as they are registered to your specific name and for each specific attendee. There are 2 options for participants to provide comments on the agenda items. Click the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks if you have an affiliation. Alternately, you may use the questions tab in the agenda item. You may use the questions tab. Type in the agenda item number you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on the topic, we may reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. A timer may be displayed on screen during your public comments. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Douglas. And with that, we are going to start our meeting today with item 55. Tim?
Thanks, Chair Norton. Commissioners, item 55 is an action item. The commission scheduled this condemnation appearance at the request of In-N-Out Burger. I would first like to ask if the property owner or the representatives are on the line today.
If they're on the line, they would need to raise their hand so we could acknowledge them.
Give them a second. Okay, I'll proceed. This appearance relates to impacts to the In-N-Out property caused by a $975,000 project on State Route 138 in Los Angeles County. The project proposes to install a new traffic system with ADA compliant curb ramps, sidewalks, and driveways. Under eminent domain law, a property owner whose property is under condemnation consideration has the right to appear before the commission to question 3 issues. 1, does the public interest and necessity require the proposed project? 2, is the project planned and located in a manner that will be most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury? And 3, is the property necessary for the proposed project? The commission neither determines the amount of compensation for the property rights to be acquired, nor deals with any issue other than the 3 just stated. Government Code Section 7267.2 requires the department to make an offer to purchase the property rights needed. The department has made the required offer. Code of Civil Procedures Section 1245.24 specifies 8 affirmative votes for commission approval of the resolution of necessity. The property owner's objections and the Caltrans response to the objections are included in the attachments to the book item. I would also like to add that Caltrans has informed the commission the work related to the driveways at the property in question will be performed at night. Staff has reviewed the objections and the department's responses and recommends the commission approve the resolution of necessity.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if we have any public comment on this item and whether or not the owners and property owners have been recognized today. Are they on?
Chair Norton, I see no public comment at this time or anyone indicating that they are the property owner at this time.
Okay. Well, if no one wishes to speak, I entertain a motion on this item.
Second, Commissioner Eager.
Thank you. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman. Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavoloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We're on item 56. Tim, also a resolution of necessity.
Thank you. Commissioners, item 56 is an action item. The commission scheduled this condemnation appearance at the request of In-N-Out Burger. I will give the property owner, the representatives, again, one other opportunity to see if they're on the line today. I'm gonna guess not, because we just approved the prior one, and the property in question is the same property that as was just heard on tab 55. However, the property spans over 2 separate parcels. Hence, the appearance is related to the same impacts to the In-N-Out property caused by the same project on State Route 138 in Los Angeles County. As previously stated in tab 55, the commission is only to consider the 3 findings under eminent domain law that are not related to the amount of compensation owed to the property owner for acquisition. Caltrans has made the required offer to purchase the property rights needed per statute. The property owner's objections and Caltrans' response to the objections are included in the attachments to the book item. And again, I'd like to add that Caltrans has informed the commission, informed the commission that the work related to the driveways at the property will be performed at night. Staff has reviewed the objections and the department's responses and recommends the commission approve the resolution of necessity.
Thank you. Justin, I want to confirm that there's no public comment and that we do not have representatives from the property owners here today.
Correct, Chair Norton. I do not see any attendee indicating they wish to make public comment or indicating that they are the property owner at this time. Thank you.
Okay, based on your recommendation to support, could we get a motion?
So moved. Eager.
Thank you. Do you have a second?
Martinez,
Thank you very much. Douglas, could you please do the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 57.
Thank you. This condemnation appearance is at the request, again, of In-N-Out Burger. While this sounds similar to items 55 and 56, this resolution of necessity involves a different restaurant location in a different county for a different Caltrans project. So due to that fact, I'd like to ask again if the property owner or their representatives are on the line today. Not hearing any, I'll proceed. This appearance relates to impacts to the property owner caused by a $31.2 million project on State Route 74 in Riverside County. The project proposes to rehabilitate pavement, install fiber optic cable for traffic signals, and upgrade curb ramps to meet ADA standards. Under eminent domain law, the property owner whose property is under condemnation consideration has the right to appear before the commission to question 3 issues. I'll repeat them again. Does the public interest and necessity require the proposed project? Is the project planned and located in a manner that will be most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury? And is the property necessary for the proposed project? The commission neither determines the amount of compensation for the property rights to be acquired nor deals with any issue other than the 3 just stated. Caltrans has made the required offer to purchase the property needed per statute, and the property owner's objections and Caltrans responses to the objections are included in the attachments to the book item. Staff has reviewed the objections and the department's responses and recommends the commission approve the resolution of necessity.
Okay, Justin, per each public hearing, we need to again ask if they are present and we have any public comments today.
Chair Norton, I do not see any attendees indicating that they are the property owners or anyone looking to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay, if not, could we have a motion to approve?
So moved. Kehoe.
Second.
Thank you. Douglas, can you please do the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you so much. And now we will move on to item 58. And after that, we will take item 13, the California Transportation Commission Equity Initiatives Update. Thank you. Hannah?
Good morning, commissioners. Previously, you'd asked for an update from the industry perspective on the transition to zero emissions. And so Chris Shimoda, the Vice President of Government Affairs at Caltrex, will be giving a presentation on that. And in his presentation, he'll be covering things like the additional cost of electric vehicles, the future cost of electricity, and the need for additional infrastructure. And we recognize as commission staff that companies need time to find solution to some of these challenges, and we want to work with them wherever possible. And I wanted to just quickly say a few things that we've done to try to help with the funding situation. One is that in the spring, Caltrans and CalSTA and commission staff met with the federal government, and as part of that, those talks, they talked to the feds about the need to take off the 10% cap on it's on non-highway related projects in the trade corridor program, because the trade corridor program has National Highway Freight Program funds. That's partly what makes up the program. And right now there's a 10% cap on any non-highway related funding. So they just talked about the need to remove that cap so that we can fund more multimodal projects. We also are working with stakeholders to identify the types of projects that could be eligible under the trade corridor program that are zero emissions. And then we also worked on a funding list of state and federal programs that offer funding for zero emissions projects, so that if some projects are not eligible in trade corridors, they may be eligible under another state or federal funding program, just so that applicants are aware of the resources available to them. But that concludes my comments, and I'll turn it over to Chris for his presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Shimoda.
Morning, Chair Norton, and good morning to the rest of the commission. As Hannah had mentioned, I am Chris Shimoda, Vice President of Government Affairs with the California Trucking Association, and thank you for the invitation to be with you here today. I think it's been maybe 3 years since I've been with the commission, and very glad to be back with you here on this very important topic. Next slide, please. Okay, so first, just a quick trucking industry overview for those of you who don't have to think about and live and breathe trucking every day. So the goods movement industry is extremely important in the state of California. The prior administration had done an analysis in 2016 and found that goods movement dependent industries, so our manufacturers, agricultural producers, as well as our supply chain industries, constitute about 1/3 of the state's economy and jobs. And within the supply chain itself, trucks are the dominant mode of delivery of goods and freight, with roughly 80% of the goods that we all utilize in our daily lives being delivered exclusively by truck. And then a good portion of the rest of those goods being transported in a multimodal fashion between either ships and truck or rail and truck as well. And despite the fact that the state of California is probably known globally as the home of Silicon Valley and Hollywood, NPR did an analysis a few years ago and found that in many states, including California, truck driver is actually the most common occupation here in the state. And so it's a huge driver of working class blue collar jobs. And if you take a look at lists with regards to occupations you can do without a college education and be well compensated, truck driving and the trucking industry ranks very high on those lists. It's a great pathway to the middle class for those Californians who do not intend to pursue college degrees. And then despite the fact that the industry is very large and ubiquitous within the state, it is a industry that is dominated by mom and pop businesses. 96% of trucking companies nationally operate fewer than 20 trucks. And when you go down to the 6 truck threshold, it's 9 out of every 10 companies run 6 or fewer trucks. And so, the big mega fleets or brand names that you do know actually constitute a very, very small piece of the industry. The vast majority of trucking is, very small businesses. Within our association itself, our average member runs 20 trucks. It's a family-owned, typically second or third generation trucking company within the state. And also within trucking, there really is, if you've seen one truck, you've seen one truck. There is a vast use case for commercial trucking in the state. And I just included, kind of a small representative sample of the different types of uses for commercial trucking within the state. You've got your parcel vehicles that you see running through your neighborhood every day. This red truck here with that huge, thing in the back, that's actually a wind turbine component being hauled. That's the heavy haul segment. We've got auto haulers. We've got, a good fleet that supports our seasonal agricultural harvests, the container exports and imports in and out of the ports, construction vehicles, you name it, trucks do it. Next slide, please. Okay, so with regards to the state's zero emission goals, at a very high level, the governor issued an executive order in 2020 calling for transition to zero emission vehicles in the light duty space by the year 2035. It was all new light duty sales by the year 2035 need to be zero emissions. And on the commercial vehicle side, it was where feasible, all commercial vehicles by the year 2045 on the road need to be zero emissions, with the truck servicing the ports going to zero emission by the year 2035. And so in 2020, the Air Resources Board adopted a regulation that was called the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation, which is a manufacturer sales requirement in the state of California. And the upshot of that rule is that roughly, 300,000 vehicles by the year 2035 need to be transitioned to zero emissions by that sales schedule. It's an extremely ambitious rule. And to give you some context, so as long as the light duty industry has been working on the zero emission car, and I think most everybody sees those on the road today. Big brand names like Tesla and others who are very aggressively marketing those products. The Air Resources Board estimates that roughly 8% of new car sales are zero emissions, or range extended hybrid products like a Chevy Volt. And to give you context about where the Air Resources Board would like the commercial trucking sector to go, they want us to get beyond the percentage of sales that are happening in the light duty space by roughly 2025. And so it's an extremely ambitious goal that they've set out for the manufacturers. And currently, the ARB is looking into an additional regulation on the fleet side, so that they've already instituted a requirement for the manufacturers to start building and selling zero emission vehicles, and they're looking at requirements to require fleets to use those vehicles. And so what you see on this slide is the schedule as was proposed in March of this year for fleet users to transition to zero emission vehicles, and who they are looking at targeting with this regulation is what they're calling high priority fleets, which is fleets that run 50 or more trucks, brokers who work with 50 or more trucks. And so that's actually going to get into a lot of those smaller fleets who work with brokers to get a good part of their business. Any entity who does $50 million or more revenue nationally that operates even a single truck above 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating would be subject to the regulation, as well as public entities. So your municipal fleets are going to be in these requirements as well. And so, you can see the percentages are broken down by sort of use case or duty cycle, but again, the end goal here is really basically all trucks on the road transitioning to zero emissions by the year 2040. This small fraction of trucks at the bottom, that transition to 2042. I think I've done an analysis. It's like 98% of the trucks would be transitioned by this schedule. And as Hannah had mentioned, I did want to just make a quick, bit of context as far as how much these vehicles do cost. So, your average Class 8 truck, which is your classic big rig, costs roughly $120,000 to $150,000, depending on the type of truck and the options. Your typical battery electric Class 8 vehicle is, and we don't know exactly how much these vehicles are going to cost because they're in the very, very early stages of commercialization. But, the generally accepted metric is those vehicles are going to cost roughly 2 to 3 times what the traditional diesel vehicles are going to cost. Your hydrogen fuel cell options are probably going to cost a bit more than that. Next slide, please. Okay, and as it had mentioned, the ARB is also looking at meeting the governor's goal in the executive order of getting trucks servicing both our ports as well as our Class 1 rail yards to zero emissions by the year 2035. And, these are the trucks that are critical links in our global supply chain, and they are on an accelerated time. Next slide, please. Okay, so wanted to really focus on infrastructure given, the mission of the California Transportation Commission. And I know I've seen lots of discussion about, what can the infrastructure side of the state's funding do to support these goals. And so, we've been doing a lot of analysis on charging infrastructure this year to try to, sort of wrap our own minds around how this is going to work. And, there's a lot of numbers here, so I'm going to try to break it down in a way that's going to make sense. And so one of your sister agencies, the California Energy Commission, pursuant to, it was AB 2127, was tasked with doing an analysis of the charging infrastructure needs of the state of California for both light-duty passenger cars as well as medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And CTA actually supported that bill to try to get some better data and analysis on this particular issue out there. And what the Energy Commission's preliminary findings are is that for the commercial trucking sector, they believe that the state of California to reach roughly half the number of vehicles that I quoted for the year 2035, which was 300,000, is going to need roughly 140,000 50 kilowatt chargers, which is a sizable charger, but in the commercial space is actually a smaller, slower charger. And then roughly 16,350 kilowatt chargers. And so to give a little bit of context about what that means on the truck side, a Class 8 electric truck is expected to get if you want to call it a fuel efficiency of about 2 kilowatt hours per mile. So it's going to use 2 kilowatt hours for every mile that it travels. And so a 350 kilowatt charger can provide that truck about 150 miles of range in an hour. And so, as opposed to your traditional diesel vehicle is going to fuel up in roughly 20 minutes and have hundreds of miles of range. It does take quite a while, even on the faster type of chargers. And 350 kilowatts is what I'm finding is basically at the edge of what you can do on the infrastructure side. Some of the early demonstration vehicles are their battery management systems on the vehicle themselves actually won't even allow you to charge that quickly. And so this is pretty much, as fast as we can conceivably go. And so, you do have the challenge of range just limited by how quickly you can charge these vehicles. And to give a little bit of context about how much electricity we're talking about when you're planning for this infrastructure and potential grid impacts, your average household in the state of California in a month uses roughly, let's call it 560 kilowatt hours of electricity for that entire month. And so one of these 350 kilowatt chargers will be moving the same amount of electricity as a household uses in a month in about 1.5 hours. So we're not talking about, insignificant amounts of power running through the grid at one time. And when you're talking about that amount of electricity, what we've started to do is try to get an idea of what the public or retail charging infrastructure may look like. Your average truck stop has roughly, let's say 10 to 20, they call them, fueling lanes or pumps. And if you were to just convert all of those diesel pumps to a 350 kilowatt charger, what you would end up with is a project with a potential electricity demand of up to 7 megawatts in any given hour. And what we're finding is that is in all likelihood for most locations on, we've been doing a lot of analysis of SoCal Edison's grid, going to be more than you can do without touching the utility side of the infrastructure upstream, where you may be potentially triggering things like substation upgrades, transmission line upgrades, and other sort of things that will delay those projects pretty significantly. Ideally, what you're going to try to do is do a smaller type project. So, I've heard the general rule of thumb is about 2 megawatts or smaller, 2 to 3 megawatts or smaller, and site it somewhere on Edison's grid where it can handle that sort of additional demand, so that you don't trigger these upstream issues that are going to, again, delay projects pretty significantly. And under any scenario, when you look at, well, what does that translate into as far as the number of locations? It's in the high hundreds or thousands, that we're talking about here. And so it's a pretty significant build out that we're looking at, if these vehicles are going to be supported by public charging or retail charging. So the ports of LA and Long Beach alone, because what you find is, pretty interesting is you can do sort of average demands, but the Energy Commission did some work to try to characterize when those trucks were actually going to charge. And their analysis says, for the ports of LA and Long Beach, the drayage truck demand is going to come more in, let's say, the 5 to 7 p.m. hours, which is unfortunately the highest peak time of use charges for Edison's rate structures, as well as, the time where we have some difficulties where everybody's coming home and turning on their TVs and running washing machines. And that's generally the highest demand period for electricity use as a whole. And we've found that for the port fleet alone, which constitutes, I think it's less than 10% of the trucks, the Class 8 trucks in Southern California, that fleet could generate, plausibly up to a gigawatt of demand in that 5 p.m. hour, during, let's say, July, when the ports are at their busiest. And so it is a very significant possible demand just from this piece of the fleet. And, we'd say that I think more analysis and having a very strategic approach about how we're looking into public and private investment in this infrastructure is going to be needed. Next slide, please. Okay, so and to close out, I'd say that what we really should be doing is looking at best possible use cases of these vehicles and trying to do what we can to accelerate them as quickly as possible. And when you look at the barriers for specifically battery electric vehicles, what you come up against time and time again is that cost, that 2 to 3 times greater cost for especially the Class 8 vehicles. Weight, which these vehicles are in at least the demonstrations that our members are engaged in, roughly 6,000 to 8,000 pounds heavier than their diesel counterparts right now. That obviously could change in time as battery packs get more energy dense and they can be shrunk to have less of a weight impact. But as it stands right now, I haven't heard anything under 6,000 pounds additional weight. So you're going to be reducing payload, putting more trucks on the road potentially with these vehicles if you're getting into those classes where weight becomes a consideration. Range, again, is an issue. Your typical diesel vehicle can go 500 to 700 miles before refueling and can do it within 20 minutes when it needs to top off. You're not going to get more than, let's say, 100 to 150 miles within even an hour of charging with today's best available chargers. And then the infrastructure, we absolutely need to have a plan to roll out the charging and fueling infrastructure in the case of hydrogen because it largely does not exist for commercial vehicles today. And so where our folks and, and talking to the experts within our membership, we've got a lot of the leading edge type fleets on this technology within our membership. We've had a task force for about 3 years talking about these issues. Where our experts are telling us to go is generally a class 6, which is, below the big rigs, more of like a straight truck and below, down to the class 2B size, which is your Sprinter van size vehicle, which is doing e-commerce deliveries in neighborhoods. Those type vehicles that are returning to base, doing essentially, they call it depot charging type operations that have significant downtime, let's call it 8 to 10 hours of downtime to charge. And the reason why you want to look at those vehicles is a couple of reasons. So number one, you don't typically run into as many weight and range issues in these spaces. You can call it pickup and delivery services or first and last mile delivery. They typically run out of space before they run out of weight, legal weight that they can operate on the road. You can use significantly lower capacity chargers. So even potentially something below 50 kilowatts down to like your, 19 to 20 kilowatt chargers over an extended period of time. And what that allows you to do is put a significantly lower strain on the local grid. These projects become significantly cheaper as well as, less complex and they take less time where you can do those types of projects. We're really hearing from our folks that's where, the sort of earliest use cases are going to develop. And so, we've interacted a bit with, folks as far as, okay, if public incentive dollars are going to go into charging, how should that be rolled out? And, really, if we're talking about publicly available faster charging at that 350 kilowatts, or even, some folks are talking about a future where we might have megawatt or megawatt plus charging, we would really encourage local project proponents to work with fleets who are starting to work through how to integrate these technologies into their operations, where, probably most of them are looking into the centrally charged, local pickup and delivery type operations. But for those who are looking at higher class vehicles and may say, hey, if we had a publicly available charger in this location, we might be able to make this particular lane work between two of our facilities. Those are really those types of projects that I would encourage, project proponents to look into. You need an anchor customer, however you want to call it, an anchor user who's going to use that infrastructure, because the possibility of just, sort of saying, we need so many chargers, we're just going to throw them anywhere, that they could possibly go is very high. But that type of approach is going to, in my opinion, interfere with the build out of the infrastructure that's going to be needed for these local pickup and delivery fleets, where roughly 200,000 of the 300,000 vehicles that ARB wants to get on the road are going to be in those sectors, the class 2B and 3 type trucks. And so that is going to be a very significant build out in and of itself. And we really, I think we're in an era where utility resources are being, taxed more every single day. There's a lot of different priorities for the utilities right now. We need to be very smart about how we plan for and deploy this rollout so that there aren't, a lot of wasted resources and time along the way. And so I'll finish by saying thank you very much again to the commission for the invitation to be with you here today. I'm happy to take any questions and, look forward to being with you again.
Well, thank you so much for this very enlightening presentation. We have a number of people who wish to speak. Justin, could you open it for public comment, and then we'll call on the commissioners?
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. Up first, we have William Barrett.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. I'm Will Barrett. I'm the Senior Director for Clean Air Advocacy with the American Lung Association. Very much appreciate the conversation this morning. Always good to hear from staff and Chris on this topic. As a baseline, I wanted to start by saying that the American Lung Association views the rapid transition to zero-emission transportation across our passenger vehicle fleet, buses, and trucks as critical to meeting our clean air and climate standards. As Hannah Walter noted, the CTC has a critical role to play in this transition through investments, guideline development, and coordinated action with sister agencies and other stakeholders to make this transition happen as quickly as possible. This morning, I just wanted to share with you really the urgency from a public health perspective on ZEV trucks. And really, I'm somewhat surprised by the lack of discussion or invited presentation as to why we need to get to zero-emission technologies, especially in the trucking sector, as quickly as possible. The combustion of fuel in the trucking sector adds heavily to California's worst in the nation air pollution. Medium and heavy duty trucks only account for 6% of all the vehicles on the road, but over 70% of smog and particle forming NOx emissions are caused by the trucking sector. That's about a third of all pollution from the transportation sector in California. 98% of Californians live in a county that received a failing grade for either ozone or particle pollution. In our most recent State of the Air report, 7 of the 10 smoggiest cities in the United States are in California, and 6 of the 10 most polluted cities in the United States for particle pollution are in California. Ozone and particle pollution contribute to a wide range of health emergencies: asthma attacks, heart attacks, strokes, lung cancer, and premature death. Kids, seniors, low-income communities, and communities of color face the greatest risks due to air quality challenges. Diesel particulate matter is a carcinogenic toxic air contaminant. Particle pollution kills 5,000 Californians every year, half of which is attributable to the transportation sector. The good news is that the transition to zero-emission technologies can yield and will yield incredible health benefits, but we need to move as quickly as possible. We released a study in 2019 showing that this transition across the trucking sector and passenger vehicles and other sectors within the on-road transportation world could yield $22 billion in annual public health benefits in California. It's 1,900 deaths avoided annually due to cleaner air, 26,000 asthma attacks avoided annually due to cleaner air, and over 100,000 lost workdays avoided annually because our air will be cleaner due to zero-emission technologies. We're facing dual crises related to our ongoing combustion of fuels, and the combustion trucking sector continues to deliver health burdens and health emergencies to our most vulnerable Californians: children, seniors, low-income communities, and communities of color. In closing, we urge the CTC to consider the health impacts and disparities caused by the transportation sector, especially the heavy-duty trucking sector, and make investments and decisions that will directly benefit the health of Californians by spurring the transition to zero-emission technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next public comment, please.
Up next, we have Nancy Pfeffer. Nancy, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Nancy Pfeffer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gateway Cities Council of Governments in Southeast Los Angeles County. I've spoken before this body a couple of times regarding the need for the state's help in deploying cleaner heavy-duty trucks on our I-710 freeway and throughout our region. On July 7th, following withdrawal of support for the current pathway of the I-710 corridor project, our COG board formed a new ad hoc committee on the I-710. The committee is charged to focus on community engagement, equity, and effects on the 710 communities, and to return to the board with recommendations regarding the future of the project. Also at that meeting, the board voted to authorize the COG's representative to the Board of LA County Metro, Whittier Councilmember Fernando Dutra, to seek a joint letter with Metro addressed to state and federal agencies requesting partnership and funding on a clean truck program on the I-710 corridor for zero-emission vehicles. We're working with Metro to finalize this letter, and we'll share it with you, of course, once it's done. While the work of the ad hoc committee is just beginning, I anticipate that directing new funding to deployment of zero-emission vehicles on the 710 corridor and throughout our region will be a priority. I would be grateful for the assistance and partnership of the CTC in helping the COG work effectively with the many state agencies that have a role in encouraging and funding the transition to cleaner vehicles. Our communities need this transition to occur as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Next public comment.
Up next, we have Julia Randolph.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that William Barrett with the American Lung Association made about just having at the baseline viewing rapid electrification of trucks, buses, and vehicles as critical to reaching our climate mandates here in California, and also the urgency of the health effects and impacts of the goods movement sector, especially the heavy trucking sector, on our Californians. And I also just wanted to state, like, while we appreciate this industry perspective that Chris gave, I think it would also be highly beneficial in the future to have not the nonprofit sector and somebody who specializes in this, like CalSTART, be included in these conversations, or just in these presentations here at CTC. And I know that we've spoken with staff about this, and we really appreciate their response to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does that conclude public comment, or do we have others in the queue?
Chair Norton, I see no other attendees with their hand raised, but we do have one written comment at this time,
Thank you.
which I will read off. It comes from Bruce Abernathy. He writes, "This is an important discussion. It shows the demand effect on the grid in California. The discussion also needs to expand to include demand effects on the grid in areas where small vehicle charging and transit vehicle charging is taking place. Timing of charging and power production at charging facilities may also significantly affect the conversation. Thank you."
Thank you. With that, I am going to call on Commissioner Inman, and then Commissioner Liu is in the queue.
Thank you, Chair Norton, and thank you, Chris, for sharing with us today. Question I have for you is, as I look at the zero emission passenger vehicle journey and try to learn from that and be able to build on some successes, it seems to me that early on, there was a lot of leasing that went on to encourage folks to give it a try. And so I think as we embark on this journey, is anybody working on the opportunities around some kind of financing, leasing mechanism to accelerate adoption and not have folks be hesitant because of the fact, it's new and they don't know what the useful life is going to be and how it's going to work. It just seems to me like we would get across the goal line a lot faster if we had some options. And so, I look to learn from what we've done in the past and think that might make some sense to accelerate adoption. Is anybody working on that aspect?
And thank you for that question, Commissioner Inman. It's my understanding that even some of the larger fleets are working with leasing companies or companies like Ryder and Penske to do these vehicles. And so I think that same, if you want to call it hesitancy or early risk avoidance is going to occur, because this is going to be brand new technology that people don't necessarily understand, know how to maintain, all the rest of it. And so I do think there's going to be a good bit of that in the early days, but we're still at the very, very early stages of trying to figure out how, if you want to call it the back end business piece of this, is going to work. The traditional diesel vehicles are also largely financed as well. And you're just looking at a vehicle that potentially is going to cost 2 to 3 times more where the public incentive money for vehicles, which we have always advocated should come from sources like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, Carl Moyer, the other sources of funding that are coming from the state, as opposed to the, precious gas tax dollars that we need to preserve and maintain the state's traditional infrastructure. Those vehicle incentives do need to continue to be made available until that incremental cost gap starts being closed in future years. So still trying to figure it out, I guess, is the short answer. But no, that's a phenomenal question.
Well, I do think, it's one thing for the large fleets, but we've got to remember the sector is dominated by small businesses. So, I think we did a good job of getting a lot of folks to try their first EV through that mechanism. And I can remember folks saying, I can manage this. So I think that on making that resource available is really, really going to be important. And then what about the actual fueling analysis in terms of, what I heard from you was it's important for us to get that infrastructure, the fueling infrastructure, whether it's hydrogen or the electricity in the right places. And, it's not so easy as stopping for an hour versus stopping for 20 minutes. So I think we need to make sure that those are strategically synergistic so that can work into those models. Anybody doing fueling analysis and really looking at duty cycles and seeing, I appreciate this because I think the more we get good information, the faster we're getting across the finish line with reducing these emissions. And it's not a debate about reducing emissions, it's about how do we get there in the quickest manner. So what about the fueling analysis?
Yeah, and I'll sort of say, I think the Energy Commission is doing some of that work. I call it like the macro analysis of just how many what is the ballpark of the number of chargers that we're going to need. And then when you actually start looking at fleets deploying, you start running into some interesting things. I'll try to tell a very short anecdote about a fleet member of ours up in Northern California that I think it was about 4 years ago now had looked into applying for, and I apologize for the acronym, it's a ZANZEV grant through the state of California. They're a 30 truck fleet. They wanted to do 10 Class 8s, so a third of their fleet converted to zero emissions. And what they found as they started going through the process of trying to do one of these projects was, okay, we want to do solar-based charging, but the building that we're in, the roof actually will not support the solar panels, and so we're going to need to look at separate land to put up the solar panels and the charging. So it became a land acquisition issue. There were all sorts of other things that came up, and they ultimately actually didn't get the grant. So even where we had a willing project proponent, a fleet who was motivated to do something, they ran into a lot of sort of site specific issues as they started trying to deploy the project. And so as useful as the macro analysis is, I think for the policy discussion of, grid impacts generally as a whole, and then can we start characterizing some localized impacts? Once you actually start, tearing the walls down, so to speak, you find all sorts of, additional types of difficulties. So you can't really do an analysis, unfortunately, of what that's going to look like once we actually start doing the transition.
Whew, thank you.
Commissioner Liu, and then Commissioner Kehoe is in the queue.
Thank you, and excellent questions from Commissioner Inman. I do agree with you, Chris. I think that Ryder and Penske are very interested in lease model, opportunities for heavy duty Class 8, maybe Class 6 projects. And there's also a lot of pilot projects, incentive funding going out there to kind of test the waters for Class 8 heavy-duty trucks. One of the consequences, though, I think that doesn't get a lot of attention is it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where, given these, this aggressive rollout schedule, that small trucking firms can survive it. I mean, I just kind of picture the big trucking firms with capital, with the ability to finance these things at decent interest rates, are the only ones who are going to be able to compete. Have you really thought that through, and do you think that's going to impact your members and membership?
No, thank you, Commissioner Liu, for the question. This is, I think, part of the discussion that really deserves more highlighting is, if we do this correctly as a state, we're going to be looking at vehicle types and duty cycles where you can make earlier market cases for transitioning to the battery electric technology. And that's, again, predominantly in that smaller class vehicle, return to home base. Some of the advantages of electric vehicles with respect to operations and maintenance savings materialize much more quickly in those spaces, and the incremental costs are going to be lower in those class of vehicles. And so what I really think we're talking about is more like the Class 8 type scenario, where the incremental costs are going to be high, the charging scenarios are a little bit more challenging, and some of the payback starts becoming a little bit more challenging. That is where, if the state does want to accelerate into areas where there's not necessarily a market case, and you're going to have a lot of potential economic impact, robust state incentives to make up that gap. And also, I just think we need to be, as smart as we can about the deployment of this technology. Nobody is really interested in seeing, sort of high profile, let's say projects that didn't work quite as well. I think that, from the technology vendors to the fleets to policymakers, everybody wants to see the initial deployments of this technology be successful. So, I'd really sort of turn back to, I would listen to even the largest fleets in the country, those well-capitalized folks, who, I think would have more wherewithal, are saying, the Class 7 and 8 stuff is not as easily, the pathway to transitioning there is not as easily, foreseeable right now. What we really need to start with is those best use cases, local pickup and delivery, Class 6 and below.
Yeah, I mean, which makes a lot of sense. And I know that CalSTART talks about the beachhead sort of philosophy. You get the beachhead in with those smaller vehicles, even though they're still heavy duty vehicles, but that will lay the pathway for the larger ones over time. And you snuck something in there in your comments that I wanted to call out, that you mentioned that, there's a higher initial cost, but the operating costs supposedly should be a savings. In theory, I mean, brake changes alone from regenerative braking should save your truckers a whole lot of money. So we are hoping that over time that those lower operating costs will make it a little bit more feasible for zero emission heavy duty vehicles. You didn't talk a lot about hydrogen and the fuel cell options, especially for Class 8 and for over the road, and even perhaps, in drayage. It seems that there are a lot of advantages: the weight advantage, the fueling time, and it seems like it might be hydrogen that proves out to be the most advantageous technology in the end. What do you think about that?
That's also a phenomenal question, because the fleet managers that I talk to that are in charge of looking into this stuff are very excited about hydrogen. For I think some of the reasons that you outlined. The refueling time is very similar to a diesel vehicle. You can get a hydrogen truck filled in roughly, let's call it 20 to 30 minutes to a full, state of charge, or whatever the term is on the hydrogen side. The general observation I have about the hydrogen vehicle sector is that it does seem to be trailing a bit in their timeline of development. You do have some of the same issues with regards to you do need to do a very robust public infrastructure or retail infrastructure build out in order to make those vehicles work. I think the natural gas sector can attest to the fact that there's, you got to solve the chicken and egg problem, and that's not easy. But the fleet managers, again, that I talked to are very excited about the possibility of hydrogen. It's just that what they're looking at right now largely is more of those, localized routes that may be able to be performed with the technology that is, seemingly going to be available.
Yeah, it would help if the OEMs who are looking at hydrogen started moving forward a lot faster. I know there's maybe one, maybe two, but yeah, I completely agree with you. Chris, thank you for the excellent summary and all that information. It's a lot to absorb, and I spend most of my day job looking at this issue, and you really hit the nail on the head with your comments, and I do appreciate it. And with regard to staff, Nancy Pfeffer's request for assistance with 710 freeway, I would like to just chime in and support. She's got a very good point there that Metro and Gateway Cities COG is really trying to figure out how to clean up the 710 freeway, and it should be a priority for us. Those communities have suffered for a very long time. From diesel trucks going in and out of the ports to the rail yards and to the warehouses. And we do have a significant amount of TSEP funding that can be used in creative ways, maybe perhaps not for rolling stock, but for other parts to support the deployment of zero emission heavy duty trucks along the 710. And there was also, I think, perhaps some creative ways to combine benefits. So I know that this Metro was talking about the problems with extending the zero emission battery electric Silverline bus all the way to San Pedro, and that one of the problems they were talking about was the lack of charging infrastructure or a place to charge. So maybe we can get the Port of Los Angeles, Metro, the community of San Pedro to figure that out. That would also support charging for heavy duty drayage trucks too. That could be using the 710 freeway. So I think there are some opportunities there to work with Nancy and Gateway Cities COG and Metro to try to help with that situation. I would encourage staff to do that. All right, thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kehoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay. Great presentation, very informative. Want to thank Mr. Shimoda for bringing a lot of information to the commission. I also want to add Will Barrett from the American Lung Association was a perfect segue, because he made the arguments about why this must be done. Not arguments, really, the facts. He laid out the significant policy issues, health, equity, environmental, that we need to address. So that was a good way to enter into the public comment and the commissioner conversation. This is not easy, not simple. And it is going to be a challenge, but it really must be done. And I was listening to Fran's remarks, which were excellent as always. She was presenting some creative ideas and programs that might be implemented or help, or if they were expanded. The idea of leasing some vehicles for companies to try out. And as always, she has that commitment to getting things done. So I applaud Fran for that. Her comments on refueling, I think, were important. And I do think for future discussions, it would be good to have more stakeholders at the front end of the conversation, so that we saw, the bigger picture. Though I do think it's important to look at the trucking industry as a whole. It's a very diverse industry, lots of different kinds of operators and owners. And so that was worth exploring, definitely, Mr. Shimoda. And I wanted to ask Commissioner Inman, if she's still tuned in, or to any of the other commissioners, do you think that some of the things we learned at the ports to help small truckers convert from the really old dirty diesels to newer vehicles, also a very expensive operation for guys that literally drive one truck, are there things that we can take away from that discussion that might help the transition to EVs for the truckers we're talking about today?
I mean, I would certainly hope that we can learn from our past and build on the successes and maybe not learn the hard lessons as well. I think, you know, what Chris brought up in the discussion of one of the fleet owners, the details, the devil's in the details as you try to put this together. You know, we've heard from our trucking partners that, you know, the initial cost is one thing, but there's insurance issues for them. And I think we just have to look at all of those little areas that we need to find a solution for. And I totally want to be committed to keeping the small businesses. It is, you know, I think it's imperative. Number one, the California economy is driven on a small business economy, and this sector is a huge sector. And it's also a very diversified sector. So I think that it's imperative for all of us to look at that. And I brought up the leasing because I can remember one of our transportation partners showing me her new ZEV car, and she was proudly saying, my payments equal to my cell phone payments, so I could get this, you know. But it just struck with me like that got her over the hurdle. And I think, you know, these men and women are making their livelihood on these vehicles, and, you know, the infrastructure, we're energy hogs. So I think to move all of the stuff that we're all trying to move around, that are really the energy part of it. And what I would love to do is make sure that we can really connect the men and women that are doing this on a daily basis, that can bring forward a suggestion of how to make it work, you know. And I look at the truck parking study. I mean, there's so many pieces to this puzzle, but I do think that we've got to get into the weeds. We've got to not generalize with one size fits all, and let's find multiple solutions. I too have heard the hydrogen, you know, probably because of its duty cycle and its fueling maybe the heavy duty energy source that ends up being the one of choice. And I think that's fine. I mean, I do not have a predetermined notion of which would be better. But I do think if we can be very, very strategic and make sure with our industry partners that we're going to get the outcomes that we need. Because, you know, we've had other deployments where we thought we were going to get something and then we didn't. So that's not going to help any of us, you know. So I think we have to roll up our sleeves, get everybody to the table, looking for solutions, trying some things. And, you know, it's not going to be, as our buddy Dorn Barnes has reminded us, it's not going to be a straight line. And we're going to make some zigs and zags, but the more we get going on that and the more we get trying things, the better off we're all going to be. And it's huge. I mean, how many heavy duty vehicles operate in the state? And then we also, I mean, we're dealing with out-of-state commerce too. So I think it was Commissioner Liu that told me it was in a meeting where 53% of the Riverside heavy duty vehicle miles traveled were out of state. So I've got that issue too. But if we can get this proof, then other people are going to follow us too. So it's an opportunity.
Very good point. Are there other commissioners who wish to speak? Commissioner Kehoe, were you completed with your comments?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Davis, if I could.
Okay, great. Thank you. You're on the phone, so I'm glad you told me since your video's not on.
Yeah, I can't wave at you. Chris, just two questions. One, is there any coordination between your group and construction groups to, sort of make sure the quantity of power, where we need the power, and all the power that we need to manage your fleets and the construction industry fleets? Is there any discussion there? And then the second question would be, you referenced 2 to 3 times the cost of the truck. You referenced the sort of what I call we have standing time in our industry. So the standing time for these drivers while they're waiting, which somebody's getting paid for. And at the end of the day, has there been any sort of analysis on, this costs more, that costs more, but you save money here. So at the end of the day, to deliver a gallon of milk is going to cost how much when we get done with this?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Davis. And we do have construction fleets in our membership, as well as we do interface with all the big construction associations. And specific to Class 8 construction trucks, I think that is one of the more difficult duty cycles to electrify for a couple of reasons. So number one, when your work site changes, on a frequent basis, you're not going to be able to necessarily drop in charging infrastructure to support those vehicles easily. We're going to need to figure out solutions for fleets that are constantly moving from site to site, and in some cases, in fairly remote locations. So I would say on the list of types of operations to electrify, you probably have to put construction amongst one of the highest degrees of difficulty when looking at all the different factors. And with regards to the analysis of let's say return on investment, or when you start baking in all types of things like paying the driver to be charging for 2 to 3 hours, what happens with hours of service and the rest. I just keep, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I would just keep encouraging folks to listen to the fleets. And I'm always happy to put folks in contact with the actual experts in this field, which I would consider to be, some of the fleet managers and, sustainability officers within these larger, leading fleets who have been trying to, crack this puzzle for honestly 20 years at this point. I've seen what's sort of like a graveyard of failed experiments at one of our member facilities going back to as early as the early 2000s. And so they really have the expertise, and what they're telling me and saying publicly in their policy statements is you really need to look at lower class vehicles, return to base operations. Let's sort of solve for what is, at least on paper, the place that we should go first to be successful, and then start looking at some of these other areas, as the industry develops, because, it's very difficult to solve for issues that just do not have a solution at this particular point in time. But, if you listen to the fleets, they're already starting to try to, say, hey, this is where we think a return on investment could exist. And this is really where we should start putting our time, attention, and public investment.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis, did you have another question you wanted to raise?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Are there other commissioners who wish to speak? Mr. Shimoda, I had a few questions for you. One, first of all, I wanted to say thank you very much for being here, because the CTC, unlike CARB or the CEC or others, we're about making sure that we have the ability to implement. And so I thank you for your focus on implementation. It is not in question whether we need to move to cleaner fleets, it's how. And I wanted to ask you what your experience has been in the conversations with the federal government, because this is a time in the infrastructure bill that there's a lot more focus on increasing the grid capabilities. And we, as was mentioned by Hannah, CTC, CalSTA, and Caltrans went to our congressional delegation to add into the bill the ability to go beyond the 10% and TSEP that would be for non-transportation, and so that we could look at the opportunities to have hydrogen and EV fueling stations and others. How can we start meeting some of your implementation questions with not only what the state resources are, but really looking forward with the federal side as well?
So thank you, Chair Norton. And so my federal counterparts at the American Trucking Association handle most of the EV congressional work. You know, I'd say with respect to federal funding, you know, the state of California, I mean, going back to the old, you know, boy, I'm blanking on the name of the program now, but the diesel, you know, reduction funding. The federal program, it's so small. Oh, DERA was the name of the program, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. And, you know, the size of the programs coming out of the federal government have always, you know, sort of been dwarfed by the amount of money that the state of California puts up. And so, you know, we're really concentrated, at least on the, you know, California Trucking Association side, on trying to interact with, you know, our state partners on, you know, where are these, you know, pretty sizable pots of state funding going to go to their best use. And so any additional funding coming from the federal government is obviously welcome. You know, we're going to need as much as possible. I think that the forecast on the vehicle side alone from the Air Resources Board is roughly $3 billion a year is needed just on commercial trucking. I think it's $6 billion as a whole to do the transition that's called for in the governor's executive order. And so, yeah, we definitely need as much funding as possible, but I always want to be mindful, especially for the California Transportation Commission. We're also very mindful of the needs on the traditional infrastructure side as well. You know, we were a supporter of SB1 and primarily for the fix it first approach, you know, preserving the infrastructure that we have today, making smart investments in additional capacity and safety projects. And so always want to be mindful that that is also a huge primary need. You know, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. You know, we'd rather try to find new pots of money where possible.
That's great. And we're really interested in working with our partners on the state at CEC and CARB to help move this forward. How do you see the governor's reservation for clean trucks assisting you with moving forward on some of these interesting explorations about how to really achieve the amount of energy you need, but also achieve like the right size of right fuel to right route, as you're talking about the EV for some routes, and then maybe hydrogen and others for other routes?
Yeah, I think this year's budget, I think we ended up coming in around, I'm trying to think on the fly here, a little bit under $500 million in total, I believe, you know, specific to trucking. And, you know, that is far short of what is forecasted to be needed. You know, however, you know, at this particular stage, I think that we need to be concentrated on listening to where fleets are saying we can make, you know, this technology work. There are some areas that I'm hearing are a little bit earlier, you know, a little bit going to be ready a little bit earlier than others. You know, some that may surprise folks. Like we've heard a lot of positive feedback about the zero emission yard truck products so far. Again, you know, the sort of last mile delivery, the smaller in class size that you go, the more interest that there's going to be. But, you know, really the public funding should go towards those areas that are getting prepared to do the early deployment. And, you know, traditionally the role of state incentive funding has been to make, you know, something go faster than it ordinarily would. You know, a fleet can acquire, I think this was the way that, you know, my member put it, with regards to that deployment that they try to do in Northern California is, look, on our own, we're going to do some piece of this, but with state funding, instead of doing 10 trucks, we maybe 20. So that's sort of, what you get bang for the buck wise when you put public incentive money into these sort of areas.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you giving us this sort of real implementation conundrum so that we have an early look at how to work with our network to really address all of these issues, because you are trying to get to yes and just demonstrating what the issues are that we all need to work on piece by piece. So we thank you, and we thank you for all the work that you and your members have done to keep our economy going during COVID. So much more was needed, and we want to support you with the infrastructure you're going to need to move cleanly and to move better. And so we really look forward to working with you and your association in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Norton, and thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thanks again. With that, we're going to move to our presentation from Sequoia Erasmus and Russell Rawlings for the California Transportation Commission Equity Initiatives Update.
Good morning. Thank you. I will give Russell 1 second to join us. Perfect.
Good morning.
Hi, Russell.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chair Norton. I'm delighted to join you today. Tab 13 is an informational item, and Equity Advisory Roundtable member Russell Rawlings will provide an update on ensuring accessibility in the hybrid meeting environment, which has been identified as a priority of the roundtable. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Rawlings.
Good morning, Commissioners. Is my microphone audio working?
Fantastically.
Wonderful. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for inviting me to be here. My name is Russell Rawlings. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am the statewide community organizer at California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. We are an organization that supports California's 28 independent living centers, which are places where people with disabilities and older adults can receive a variety of resources and information. There are 7 core services that independent living centers provide, among which are transportation navigation, housing navigation, general information and referral, and peer support, and also systemic advocacy. And I'm really glad to have been invited to be a member of the Equity Advisory Roundtable. And thank you, Sequoia, for setting up this opportunity to talk to you all. I'm really glad to be here at this point in time, too, because one of the priorities that we've seen is, as the state is moving, into the future, from this moment in time where we experienced a great level of access in a lot of regards. As a statewide organization, of course, we know the challenge of bringing everybody together to have discussions. And honestly, COVID, as difficult as it has been, has also taught us that it is possible to run meetings and hold meetings in virtual environments. And for our community, the disability community especially, it is a little bit difficult to imagine kind of shifting back to a fully enacted Brown Act. And we've actually been trying to advocate for some change. However, we know that things are very difficult right now, and would appreciate actually the commission weighing in, especially whenever possible, to talk about what hybrid models look like. And I know that I've been asked here to talk about hybrid models. There have not, unfortunately, in my experience, been very many large-scale hybrid models to kind of study. So again, I think that the commission might be on track to really be on the front edge of envisioning what hybrid might look like. Of course, all of this really ties to the governor's executive order N0821, which does bring about a mandate that the state return to full compliance of the Brown Act as of October 1 of this year. So that's coming up. I think our challenge ahead of us is going to be figuring out how we bring environments like this one and in-person hybrid communication together. I would actually hope that maybe the commission look at bringing the hybrid side really close to just simple Brown Act compliance, and possibly having some way for the general public as much as possible to be interacting equally in a virtual environment. And I'm not sure, again, I'm not an expert in Brown Act compliance myself, so I don't pretend to be, but I am eager to see that hopefully what happens is that the general public is still able to access and participate in meetings just as fully as we have been recently. So that's the gist of my personal experience around this issue. The Equity Roundtable has been a wonderful, productive dialogue so far. We are still, I think, in the very, very early stages of kind of figuring out what our exact task is, and equity is such a broad thing in general. And I, as a person with a disability who has one certain disability, I have cerebral palsy. I work with people, cross disability. So we are literally one of the most probably diverse sets of people, not just in this country, but on the planet, that people that experience disability also have with them their other identities and cultural experiences. So it's really important to understand that disability is not really a cultural identity as much as it is a prideful part of a person who has experienced, has the awareness that society has a long way to go to making sure that people with disabilities are fully included and able to equally participate. So there is, I think, a lot of exciting work ahead for the Equity Roundtable. Particularly, one of the things I know that I was also asked to speak about was access, and to talk about specifically how the commission might be able to become, more access friendly. And I always start with, well, it's about creating a culture of access. And I know one of the things I believe being worked on currently is bringing in real-time captioning and hopefully ASL translation. I think that both of these are tools that government bodies especially can use to powerfully be able to communicate with a much larger audience of people who are blind and low vision, and also people who are deaf and hard of hearing, really take advantage of these additional modes of communication, or honestly, additional modes of accessing the communication that's occurring. I also would hope that the commission is looking at being as language accessible as possible too, because so much of the material discussed here really doesn't make it out into the communities if it's not being interpreted and brought into the community. So I would hope that there is some work done to create full accessibility in that regard. The other big one, and this is difficult for a commission meeting such as this, but just really leaning into using plain language is so important, and being careful. And I'm guilty of this myself, right? We all use acronyms and dive into the alphabet soup very quickly, but it's very, very important that the public have access, perhaps to a glossary that would be very helpful, I think, for bringing people up to speed, because we all know that it's probably not as practical to ask everyone to say, California Air Resources Board instead of CARB every single time. But we know that accessing that information, though, is a barrier if it's not something that you're just brought with the knowledge of before you show up to a meeting. So I'm happy to field any questions and have any general discussion that commissioners would like to have. I am but one representative of the Equity Advisory Roundtable, and I certainly don't want to speak for all of the members, especially as I'm getting to know everyone, and I'm really excited about doing deep equity work. It's challenging. So I applaud all of you for for prioritizing this, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Justin, do we have any public comment on this presentation?
Chair Norton, yes, we do at this time have one attendee with their hand raised, looking to make public comment.
Thank you.
We have Jay
Sorry
Jordan.
to
Oh,
Sorry to
sorry.
interrupt. I actually do have a couple more updates from our side of I'm not sure if you want me to finish that before public comment or.
Let's take public comment just to get that through in case the comment was on Mr. Rawlings' presentation, and then I'll go back to you, Sequoia, and to finish the total item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Norton. We have the one attendee at this time, Jay Jordan. You have been unmuted. You're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Thank you. I'm also happy to make my comment after the full presentation, if that works.
Okay. I had one question for Mr. Rawlings, and that was your presence on the roundtable has been extraordinary, and really your advocacy has and voice is really appreciated. And I wanted to ask you, what mobility options, what are the things that you are most excited about in technology and mobility that for yourself and the groups that you're advocating for, and how can we as CTC start leaning in on some of those new technologies or even existing things that would really make mobility so much better in California?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. You know, as a person with a disability who relies on a mobility device, and again, I use a power wheelchair, so this is merely a perspective of my experience using a power wheelchair and also being in spaces where I've worked with people to give public feedback and have these deeper discussions. So I guess I should start with a little bit of background as well. Prior to working at CFILC, California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, I was at Resources for Independent Living Centers as their director of advocacy. Resources for Independent Living is the ILC, or Independent Living Center, that serves Sacramento and Yolo County. And one of my very first advocacy, the thing that got me in the door and got me excited about advocacy long before I was paid to do any of this work, was the access to public transportation. I moved here in 2001 to Sacramento from the metropolitan Houston, Texas area. I was in the kind of far-flung suburbs of that area. So I always had this notion of, you know, cities as being, you know, just ridden with barriers. Although, you know, my experience would have been probably entirely different had I lived 20 miles closer into the city. And public transportation really honestly changed my life quite dramatically. And I was quickly educated that these things didn't come around, you know, just by accident or by, you know, easily. It's a community government process. So when I started learning about the way that the organizations that, you know, took parts in these conversations, first, of course, was Sacramento Regional Transit and their board of directors. And then that led me on to SACOG, or Sacramento Area Council of Governments. And, you know, I learned quite a bit about the fabric of what makes and constitutes transportation, and moreover, just urban planning in large, you know, just the whole picture of urban planning. I think that far too few people get that perspective necessarily because they don't, you know, aren't offered the opportunities that I was, perhaps, you know, through my connection to Resources for Independent Living. I was just immediately said, well, you're, you know, really passionate about these subjects, so let's get you in these spaces, right? So I think that one of the things that I am most excited about, again, is during this time, especially as difficult as it is, right, we can start to think about new ways to give input and get input. I'm really excited actually this evening to be, for the first time in quite a while, attending a public transportation related meeting. Sacramento Regional Transit is rolling out low floor light rail vehicles. And that is a real game changer, I think, for so much of the system to start seeing more of these products in our community. My trip to Portland, Oregon, gosh, it's been probably 5+ years ago, riding their streetcar line was low floor system. And it's just so easy to roll off and on. And then, of course, a lot of experiences in the Bay with BART, which has a low floor system as well. These are exciting things. I think that moving us toward zero emission vehicles is both exciting and a little bit kind of difficult. The number of products, unfortunately, that exist right now in transit that have the access considered as a front part of the development is not as, I don't think it's as prioritized as I would hope that it would have been. Buses and other things, I think transportation providers are finding a lot of challenges in making them federally ADA compliant as well as compliant in zero emissions. So I hope there is a lot more development on that very, very, very soon. And I hope that we don't approach every conversation. The one thing that I always tell everyone is access is not something that you sprinkle on as a condiment. It has to be integral at the very beginning of conversations. And so much money is wasted and time is, difficulties are experienced because the conversation doesn't happen on the front end. So those are kind of things I'm very excited about. Of course, I am excited about amplifying and seeing more investment in public transportation. I think that the federal government has clearly made infrastructure a priority. And I just hope that as we roll these funds out, that we do so in an accessible way. I'm also, encouraged by, again, a move toward lowering emissions. But I hope, again, that we look at how do we do this most effectively using large, scale transit systems, and hopefully prioritizing those over again than just trying to fix solutions by single occupancy vehicles or low occupancy vehicles, even if they are quote unquote zero emissions.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I really appreciate you giving us the benefit of your experience and knowledge. With that, Sequoia, I'd love to have you complete your report, and then we'll have public comment and comments on the entirety of the report. So please stay with us, Mr. Rawlings.
Sorry for any miscommunications or not being clear enough. So I'll finish up my presentations. Thanks so much, Mr. Rawlings, for that and for providing your input and expertise. So quickly, I will update on internal and interagency equity work. So I'm delighted to join the planning team and the commission as the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement. And I really look forward to serving all of California as we co-create a more just and equitable transportation future for all. In this role, I will support ongoing roundtable efforts, take leadership in internal and external racial equity initiatives, and participate in interagency collaborations that seek to improve transportation equity outcomes. Within our interagency work, Caltrans, CalSTA, and CTC staff are developing the next roundtable agenda, working with roundtable members to develop best practices for setting up future equity advisory committees and supporting Caltrans's future equity index development. The roundtable meeting has been rescheduled for September 16th, 2021 from 1 to 4 p.m. The June meeting was postponed due to several factors, including the need to focus on internal hiring. Additionally, feedback from the roundtable members highlighted the need for added collaboration to determine priority agenda items that reflect the expertise and priorities of the members. So that definitely required extra time to address. So we're currently working with roundtable members to develop a panel discussion focused on best practices in setting up advisory bodies. We have a lot of experts in the group. So we're hopeful that these efforts will help inform future equity work for the commission and for our partners in transportation. That's all for my report, and please let us know if there's any other questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you and congratulations. We are so happy to have you here leading this very, very important work. With that, Justin, could you please open to public comment, and then we'll hear from our other commissioners.
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. First, we have Jay Jordan.
All right, thank you so much. Jay Jordan with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Thank you, commissioners and staff. I especially just want to thank the CTC staff, including Sequoia and Laura and Bridget and others, for their really thoughtful work on the roundtable. And mostly, I want to thank Russell and other roundtable members who are giving their time and their emotional energy to set a foundation for meaningful and hopefully meaningful and very long overdue change within state transportation agencies. And I want to urge CTC staff, and even more so leadership and commissioners, to really make the most of the incredible group that you have before you, and make sure that they and the forthcoming advisory committee that is laid out in the CAPTI have some decision-making power, so that this effort doesn't, turn into, simply kind of a performative consultation, but rather that deep social equity and justice work, both internally and outside of the agency. And so I know that a lot of the roundtable members have spoken about this very well, and I can also see that there are really powerful, first next steps happening. So I think it's important to make sure that continues, and that those items are actionable and really meaningful, that come out of the roundtable and the subsequent committee. And also, let's make sure the advisory committee is not the only mechanism where CTC takes action to address equity in response to CAPTI, especially. I think the commission needs to look deeply into its programs, investments, and policies, and really consider shifting priorities, changing decision-making processes, in addition to strengthening community engagement. So these all go really hand in hand. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jordan, for your comments. With that, commissioners, are there any other comments you have on this item? Well, thank you, Mr. Rawlings, and thank you, Sequoia, for your presentation today. We really appreciate your time and your information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we are going to move to item 65 and I'm sorry, we're going to move to item 61 and 62 and then the balance of our agenda. Tim?
Thank you, Chair Norton. Commissioners, tab 61 is an action item. The Caltrans National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Permit, or the Caltrans permit, is being revised by the State Water Resources Control Board. The Caltrans permit and the associated time schedule order were released on June 25th for a 60-day public review period, and comments are due to the State Water Board by August 27th. Caltrans is here to give an update on the status of the Caltrans permit and the associated time schedule order. After the presentation, Commission staff will be recommending the Commission approve a comment letter on the Caltrans permit for transmittal to the State Water Resources Control Board. I will now turn it over to Ken Johansson, and I don't have your title handy, but so you can introduce yourself. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Ken Johansson. I am the headquarters statewide stormwater coordinator representing the Caltrans stormwater program. Caltrans is entering into the next evolution of the stormwater program by collaborating with our state and regional water board partners in the development of the next statewide stormwater permit, which will advance our mutual environmental stewardship goals. I will be covering the reissuance of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Permit, also referred to as a statewide stormwater permit for simplicity, which is a regulatory tool that establishes treatment expectations from stormwater runoff resulting from Caltrans operation and maintenance activities associated with the state highway system. I will cover significant permit changes that will result in an increase in cost of compliance and the available timeline by which Caltrans intends to continue our partnering effort with the state board in the development of final permit language to minimize anticipated cost impacts. Next slide, please. I like to compartmentalize the statewide stormwater permit into two Caltrans treatment obligations. One, stormwater treatment requirements for new pavement or redevelopment projects so as to not cause or contribute to water quality impacts. Number two, stormwater treatment retrofit requirements for legacy TMDL impairments in which Caltrans is a named responsible party amongst others. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load and is a regulatory enforcement tool used to address impacts to the most impaired water bodies by establishing limits of pollutant loading from responsible dischargers. TMDL set prescriptive timelines for retrofitting those watersheds with stormwater treatment devices needed to restore California's precious water resources and reestablish the associated beneficial uses of those water bodies, which could be recreation or to sustain its contribution to a thriving ecosystem. Stormwater treatment is accomplished by permanent best management practices, or BMPs, that remove pollutants, such as when drainage systems are designed to route stormwater through a swale and pollutants are scrubbed out by the grass, or through devices that promote infiltration back into the earth, and a certain volume and associated pollutant loading are prevented from reaching water bodies. Caltrans is the largest municipal stormwater discharger in California. However, at the same time, we are the most physically constrained in terms of our ability to fit stormwater treatment devices in the linear and high-speed freeway environment. This point will become more apparent in subsequent slides as we discuss Caltrans' inability to meet compliance objectives without permit flexibilities. It has been nearly a decade since the last permit was adopted. This permit reissuance evaluates the status of TMDL compliance and offers Caltrans a time extension to meet final compliance obligations while also folding in statewide trash provisions which were enacted between permits under alternative state board regulatory mechanisms. Next slide, please. Over the course of the last 2+ years, the Caltrans Stormwater Program has been engaged in good faith collaboration with our state board and 9 regional boards in the development of a permit that meets our mutual environmental stewardship goals while considering Caltrans' business process and ability to meet compliance expectations through renewed implementation measures. Caltrans has projected an estimated increase in annual resource needs for both capital outlay support and maintenance based on Caltrans' interpretation of the formal draft permit that is currently in circulation for public comment. Caltrans continues to remain engaged in productive deliberation with state board staff to understand permit expectations while educating our regulatory partner on the impacts of permit conditions as it relates to Caltrans' business practices. For example, I want to highlight the interagency collaboration that has yielded a positive outcome by modifying permit language that no longer precludes the use of AC grindings, but ensures the practice is protective of water quality by its proper management. Caltrans implements a sustainable practice of responsibly reusing AC grindings as shoulder backing, an application that supports the roadway prism. AC grindings was a major permit change with cost implications that has since come off the list as a result of positive discussions and mutual understanding of each agency's objectives. The following remaining major permit changes will increase compliance funding needs on an already fiscally constrained program. Reducing the treatment trigger for redevelopment projects, that's new pavement or reconstructed pavement, from 1 acre to 10,000 square feet. This will result in an increase over the baseline due to more projects triggering treatment requirements. Reverting demonstration of TMDL compliance from a simplified metric of compliance units to waste loads will limit Caltrans' opportunity to fund regional partnership projects that yield economies of scale, which will also result in an increase over the baseline compliance costs. Formalizing trash control mandates into the permit is also an unfunded mandate that will increase compliance costs. I will cover each of these in more detail in subsequent slides. Caltrans does not expect that there is any latitude in the lowering of the treatment trigger and the trash control mandates, as the state board is strong in their resolve related to these issues. We are encouraged that we were able to resolve the pavement grindings issue through educating our partner on the Caltrans business process and cost implications. Caltrans will be submitting formal comments requesting modifications to specific provisions in an effort to align its compliance actions within its existing funding framework. Caltrans will continue to refine the estimated needs based on continued dialogue that allow the agencies to understand permit interpretation and expectation alongside feasible compliance implementation when integrated into Caltrans business process and practices. Next slide, please. This is a list of some of the major changes expected from the permit reissuance. We'll be focusing on the remaining 3 major changes highlighted in this slide, and we are happy to report we've seen some positive outcomes from our collaboration with our state board partner that have resulted in permit modifications and some reduced cost impacts. Next slide, please. The next slide represents the lowering of the stormwater treatment threshold from 1 acre in the 2012 permit to 10,000 square feet in the 2021 formal draft permit, setting a new threshold for redevelopment projects. Redevelopment projects that place 10,000 square feet or more or reconstructed pavement will require installation of permanent treatment devices to treat the stormwater before it leaves the site. These treatment devices include grass-lined swales, infiltration devices, or engineered media filters, all of which remove pollutants associated with highway runoff. The purpose of requiring treatment for redevelopment projects is not to cause or contribute to water quality exceedances that could result in additional water body impairments and additional TMDL designations. Next slide, please. One of the highlights of our existing stormwater permit and program is our ability to fund a robust municipal coordination grant program that optimizes transportation investments while maximizing water quality improvements. Under the purview of the existing permit, compliance units are issued to Caltrans based on a very simple monetary metric in which Caltrans receives 1 compliance units for every 88,000 of funding contribution. Caltrans has yearly compliance unit targets that, if met, will ensure progress towards final compliance. Under the new permit, compliance units are going away, and the Municipal Coordination Grant Program that funds these regional partnership projects is being regulated in a manner that limits the amount of funding for our local partners. Funding opportunities are now restricted to Caltrans pollutant load contribution, limiting our ability to fund projects that locals depend on for the successful delivery of watershed-based engineering solutions. The implications of this change is that more treatment will be required on the state highway system at a much higher cost. As previously discussed, the state highway system is not conducive to large-scale treatment opportunities due to the limited real estate associated with the linear and high-speed nature of the operating right-of-way. The next slide will highlight the cost impacts from this 10% decrease in our ability to rely on cost-effective regional partnership projects as a result of this permit change. Next slide, please. Caltrans will continue to collaborate with our partners at the state board and regional boards to develop TMDL compliance plans that optimize fiscally responsible regional partnership projects that optimize environmental outcomes. Municipal coordination permit flexibilities help Caltrans overcome on-system engineering constraints, like we talked about, the limited right-of-way and public and worker safety concerns with the high-speed environment, to support compliance generating opportunities. Next slide. On the top right, on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see the significant amount of real estate or right-of-way that's required to support some of these treatment devices. Even on the bottom picture where you have a biofiltration swale, worker safety is a concern. Even if you have a metal beam guardrail, if there is an errant vehicle, that guardrail will flex potentially into an area where a worker may be. You can see this is kind of a busy slide, but we do have an increase in on-system needs and a reduction in those off-system opportunities. Caltrans must comply with 88 TMDLs, 64 of which are included as part of an enforceable time schedule order, which require yearly internal milestones and final compliance by the year 2034. As previously discussed, Caltrans TMDL compliance strategy under the 2012 permit relies on the Municipal Coordination Program. Under the draft permit as currently proposed, large-scale off-system treatment opportunities will be limited, resulting in increased dependency with on-system projects that come at a much higher cost. Caltrans is working with the State Board to sustain fiscally responsible permit flexibilities that both Caltrans and our municipal partners depend on to achieve interim and final compliance objectives. Over nearly the past decade, Caltrans has funded over $160 million in local partnership projects. The Municipal Coordination Program is a critical component to Caltrans' strategic TMDL implementation and compliance objectives. So we do expect a 30 to 40% increase as a result of this permit constraints over the baseline. Next slide, please. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the trash provisions of the formal draft permit. I will specifically highlight the requirements that differ from the trash amendments. As part of the trash control requirements, baseline assessment and inventory and implementation plan are due within 12 months of the permit effective date, with 0 trash discharges required by 2030. The inventory map requirements include trash generation area descriptions, trash generation rates, areas where trash control measures are implemented, and drainage area and discharge locations. Institutional controls include non-structural trash controls such as enhanced maintenance cleanup efforts and public education. Next slide, please. Trash has been at the forefront of regulatory landscape over the past several years. Caltrans does not generate trash. However, we are responsible for any trash discharges that leave the state highway system as a result of this social and corporate issue. This new permit incorporates previously enacted enforcement actions referred to as statewide trash provisions and the Bay Area cease and desist order that required 0 trash discharges from 25,000 acres of trash hotspots throughout the state. Trash mandates are an unfunded mandate that will require a substantial increase in funding to comply. However, Caltrans will leverage the 3-year, $1.1 billion Clean California initiative, along with existing substantial yearly maintenance expenditures to demonstrate progress towards trash requirements from enhanced litter collection. We are very excited about the Clean California sweeping $1.1 billion initiative to remove litter and engage communities on beautification efforts through job creation and education. This is truly an unprecedented statewide effort, which will institute a multi-pronged holistic litter abatement strategy, including local projects statewide, with 1/3 of the funds going directly to our municipal partners. Our goal is lasting and transformative change where all Californians take pride in maintaining our public spaces in our beautiful state. I'll just give a few highlights on the Clean California program. $418 million are dedicated to litter collection, $287 million towards on-system beautification projects, $296 million for local projects, and a $33 million public education campaign. In addition to scaling up our litter pickup efforts throughout the state, Caltrans will incorporate sustainable landscapes and facilitate beautification projects in underserved, rural, and urban communities across the state. The initiative is aimed at driving a culture shift of shared responsibility for the cleanliness of our roadways through litter prevention, education campaigns that focus on properly throwing away trash and the impact that littering has on natural resources, waterways, public health, and safety. Next slide, please. This slide just demonstrates our state highway system management plan. It's a 10-year outlook, and it also kind of shows how it lines up with some of the new permit submittal requirements. And so we're asking the state board and regional boards to facilitate timely reviews and approvals of these plans to establish clarity and consistency in the required compliance actions in order to help align them with our practices and existing funding frameworks that minimize the impacts to SHOP funding. Right now, as the timelines are aligned, the earliest that we can program projects is the 2026 SHOP, so that will put us significantly behind our compliance efforts. However, we will continue to program at risk, understanding, you know, the expectation to deliver on TMDL compliance and trash mandates. So just last slide, please. So just to recap, Caltrans will continue to work with our state board partners to advocate for a stormwater permit that optimizes environmental outcomes for the transportation dollars invested while minimizing impacts to other SHOP programs. More interagency collaboration is needed to further develop our rough order of magnitude cost increases based on Caltrans permit interpretation and state board permit intent and compliance expectations. Fiscally responsible investments like the Municipal Coordination Grant Program that fund large-scale regional partnership projects are the permit flexibility opportunities needed to address the funding needs shortfall. Leveraging compliance credit from the Clean California funding will also provide temporary relief, although we expect the program will have long-lasting impacts from the change in social behavior expected from the public education campaign, coupled with the beautification projects. Caltrans is committed to equity-focused actions that make advancements in the areas of people, programs and projects, partnerships and planning. 90% of the Caltrans fiscal year 21 stormwater grant program was awarded to municipalities that represent constituents of underserved communities. Further, as Caltrans implements Clean California, providing benefits to underserved communities is also a top priority. Both programs work to reduce pollution exposure from the social issues surrounding littering and illegal dumping while beautifying California. Again, my name is Ken Johansson. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the development of the Caltrans statewide stormwater permit, a collaborative effort between Caltrans and our state and regional board regulatory partners. I am joined by Hardeep Takar, the headquarter chief environmental engineer, and Phil Stolarski, the headquarter division chief of environmental analysis, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johansson, for that very thorough presentation. Justin, do we have any public comment today on this item?
Chair Norton, I do not see anybody looking to make public comment at this time.
Okay. And commissioners, are there any comments that you all have to make? If not, this is an action item, so I'd like to entertain a motion. Oh. Executive Director Weiss.
I have 3 questions.
Okay.
You mentioned zero trash discharge by 2030. So what exactly does that mean, and how much trash are you discharging now?
So what that means is that that's going to require us to take a multi-pronged approach, right? We have full trash capture devices, and we also have our enhanced maintenance measures, our litter collection efforts. And so, you know, the trash generation rates vary based on region, and there's established protocol that dictate, depending on how much trash is in a certain area, it will dictate a low, moderate, higher, very high rating. So I don't have the exact number of how much trash is removed annually, but I can follow up, or I can follow up on that at a later time.
We'll follow up. You mentioned the Bay Area cease and desist order. That was an issue we heard about a while ago, but haven't heard about it. So where was it? I mean, I recall the cost estimates for that were hundreds of millions of dollars. So where is that in the process, I guess?
Yeah, thank you. So that is part of our strategic plan to deal with trash statewide. The cease and desist order in the Bay Area includes moderate trash generating areas as well. So it's a more refined scope on the areas that we need to address. There is a substantial cost of compliance to address that, but we have been partnering with the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board to maximize the benefits from our investment, not only from structural controls, but from the maintenance expenditures as well.
Okay, and my third and perhaps most important question. So bottom line on all this stuff, if the proposal gets approved as it is, what is the department's estimate of the cost, annual cost?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, right now we have a rough order of magnitude. We're looking between a 30 and 50% increase over our baseline 2012 permit costs. We are sharpening our pencils, and we're collaborating with our state board partners to understand how we're coming up with our numbers and understanding the intent of the state board and the provisions of the permit expectations and where we can collaborate. So we are refining those numbers, and we can follow up once we have a better idea on the expectation from our state board partners. But right now we're looking at a 30 to 50% increase over our 2012 baseline permit costs.
So what's the 2012 baseline permit cost?
Right now we're looking at a little north of 500 million is what we're spending on. That's the total. That's maintenance expenditures. But right now our baseline permit cost is around 190 million. That's our permit needs.
So what's the difference between the 500 million and the 190 million?
So the 190 million are capital costs, okay, and then the 500 million includes the maintenance expenditures and other programmatic costs as well. So we're looking at between 190 and 500 million is our annual comprehensive programmatic costs.
Okay, and so then you're saying at the high end at 500 million at 30 to 50% increase, you're looking at 150 to 250 million increase to comply with that new permit requirement.
Yeah, you know, so we are evaluating the nuances of the provisions.
I won't hold you to that today, but like just, you know, I feel like, you know, as policymakers need a range of numbers, and I recognize the estimate, and I hope, you know, we get an estimate with a whole page of assumptions so that everybody can feel comfortable and check them all off. But just to understand a ballpark, you know, the high end, you're looking at 250, and, you know, 30% of that 190, you know, that's, you know, what, I don't know, 60 odd, you know, a little less than 60 million, I guess. So that's the range.
Yeah, I think we really need to sharpen our pencils, and we'll need to follow up with you on that. You know, don't really feel comfortable at this point giving an exact number, but
and I look forward to having a conversation next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair Norton,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. And then I'll recognize you, and then I'll call on Commissioner Inman.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on Mitch's comment, if I could, I mean, the cost estimates, you got this one that we're not sure of. We have no idea how much the construction stormwater general permit is going to cost. And I guess what I was going to ask is there a way once we move forward with these things where there's a more accurate way to see how they line item what these real costs are, so that how do they get mixed or not mixed with other costs? And so we're not really seeing the true cost of what this new permitting and the additional new construction stormwater permit is going to cost.
Is that a question or statement for?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a question and a statement all at the same time. I mean, is there a way for them to do that so that we really get to know what the true costs are?
Can you bring that back to us? Okay.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the statewide stormwater
We
permit,
got
but
several pages of agenda items to go.
Commissioner
I'm fine with Mitch them working with Mitch on what I'm asking about, and we can move forward.
By the way,
Commissioner Kehoe, your microphone is on. Mr. Johansson, please proceed.
Yeah, so what was being asked for was the cost for the construction general permit. Today, we're talking about the statewide stormwater permit, but we are happy to follow up with the commissioners to, once we are able to refine our cost estimates and with Chief Engineer Sobelman to provide those refined cost increases to the commission once we have those numbers better figured out.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Inman.
My questions were following along the same, and the Michael Baker study that I don't remember if it was CBIA commissioned or Transportation California, but one of those two estimated on the linear projects that we were north of 80% with increased compliance. So have y'all taken a look at that and tried to reconcile what that opinion was compared to what our costs would be?
Was that specific to the construction general permit or the statewide stormwater permit?
It's a statewide, I believe, but
okay.
Okay.
We'll follow up with them on that. I mean, we have had a rough order of magnitude cost increase expectation, and after additional consultation with our state board partners, have been able to refine that. And so we're going to continue that collaborative effort. And again, we can follow up with that more refined cost estimate as we have more details on that.
And then I guess I tie it back to Director Ramachandran's presentation yesterday about the $1 billion to Clean California and my request to make it into a Keep California Clean project. So how does that all get integrated? Because to me, the more trash that we continuously have around, it's like exponentially magnifying the impact on our water, right? So if we can't clean up as many areas, are we going to be penny wise and pound foolish at the end of the day would be how do we kind of reconcile that objective, which we all get behind, I think. I don't think there's anybody that is against cleaning up the trash that's littering everywhere. So how do we reconcile those and make sure that at the end of the day, we've cleaned one little area, but all the money's gone and the other areas make more damage?
Great question. So yeah, we know trash is a major issue, right? Trash, when it degrades and releases chemicals, results in pollution and is discharged to receiving waterways. And that's why we have this resulting regulatory enforcement actions surrounding trash. It also, impacts wildlife and kills wildlife, and also spreads disease from direct contact or through vectors, through mosquitoes, right? So this $1 billion initiative is fantastic because it really has a synergy with our stormwater mandates. And we're not just going out and picking up trash. It's a holistic approach where we're taking measures to beautify the state highway system, to beautify the local municipalities, right? We have a $33 million public education campaign. So we're looking to institute social change, a change in behavior. And so all things combined over the course of the next 3 years, as we clean up litter at 20 times our current rate, we now have the resources to be successful to address the trash issue, which is something we don't generate, but is a public issue, right? That will have multiple benefits and will help. We will also leverage that funding contribution towards some of these stormwater mandates to reduce the cost impacts on the shop. So there's many benefits from this program, and we are really excited to begin implementing at a quick pace.
So is this all incremental? The $1 billion that Director Ramachandran talked about yesterday, if I have that number correct, is that incremental? Because I know in a prior meeting, he talked about the hundreds of millions of dollars that Caltrans had spent cleaning up trash, and it had to do with our conversation around solving the homelessness issue in our state. But is this an incremental push?
So this is over and beyond our existing expenditures. And so this will supplement our existing expenditures. And this is a 3-year funding opportunity and is broken out into various categories. $400 million for enhanced litter collection, $300 million for on-system beautification project, $300 million for our local partners, $33 million for public education, $60 million for resource support needs. So incremental in the fact that it's broken down into different buckets, yes, and incremental in the fact that it lasts for 3 years, starting already have started implementation.
Okay.
Does that conclude your questions? Thank you. Okay, Tim, were there any other things you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. Ken just mentioned something about working with, continuing to negotiate with the state board and looking at impacts to the shop. I was wondering, I'm more than happy to work with you to get a little better understanding of the cost estimates, and was wondering if we could do that over the next so many weeks, and then have Caltrans come back to the October meeting and maybe present just something on costs, just to kind of lay it out a little bit more. You presented a lot of detailed information as it relates to the types of things that are increasing into the permit. I think we would like to see a little bit more, maybe the basis of the estimate, but really how the numbers work out.
I was going to ask you, Tim, if you could amend your recommendation to include that, so that as we make a motion on this item, that report back is part of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That'd be great.
Yeah, we'd be happy to come back and report once we have some more refined information, additional collaboration with our state board partners. And of course, Tim, will continue to bring you in on the conversation as we refine those impacts from a rough order of magnitude to what's a realistic cost of compliance increase.
I'd like to add just one other piece. You didn't really talk about too much about the time schedule order as it relates to trash, but also the expected time frame to meet your TMDL requirements. When you're evaluating and putting together the cost information, could you also take a look at the feasibility of programming projects with the appropriate BMPs that would be able to meet those requirements?
Absolutely. Thank you for the feedback, Mr.
Thank
Sullivan.
you.
Thank you. And with that, Tim, could you amend your recommendation so that when we make a motion, the totality of what we've been talking about is included?
Sure. So my recommendation is for the commission to approve the comment letter to be transmitted to the State Water Resources Control Board, as well as Caltrans coming back to the October meeting to discuss more detailed cost estimates, as well as their ability to program projects to meet the time schedule order.
Fantastic. Could we have a motion to that effect?
Motion to.
Thank you.
Second from Kehoe.
Thank you. Martinez Kehoe motion. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Eager.
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby.
Aye.
Commissioner Gordino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavoloni. Commissioner Tavoloni, I didn't hear you.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you. And we will go to item 62. And then after item 62, we will take a short break. Ilan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, this is an information item. For the past few years, the Transportation Inspector General has presented a summary of audit findings and recommendations to the Commission. Commissioners in the past have questioned if there are processes in place to assure that we are not funding new projects for agencies that are not current on with payment. This current book item included a listing of audit history and status for Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. Dee Lam, Chief of Division of Local Assistance, is here to present DLA's processes and how Caltrans fulfill its audit oversight responsibilities, including seeking reimbursement of disallowed costs and question costs. With that, I will turn it over to Dee Lam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zeelan. Good morning, Chair Norton, Commissioners, and CTC staff, and all in attendance. Am I coming in clear?
You are. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I'm Dee Lamb, Chief of the Division of Local Assistance. I'm going to present this informational item to provide our Division of Local Assistance's audit oversight responsibilities. So first, I do want to say we work very closely with our partners to ensure that transportation dollars are spent effectively to deliver local transportation projects. Now, audits, not always a fun topic, but one that's very important to this process. Now, audits help to identify procedural weaknesses and in some cases, question costs. Once identified, this leads to plans to strengthen the local agencies' policies, practice, and compliance, as well as strengthening policies, procedures within the Division of Local Assistance. Next slide. Okay, so we'll start with just a high-level process flow for how we monitor audits and kind of the flow of audits in general. So it first starts with the Independent Office of Audits and Investigation, addresses the final audit report to our division, and then we send a corrective action plan memo to Audits and Investigations so they may verify the corrective actions. We'll address the audit findings and recommendations. So after a comment period of about 10 days from Audits and Investigation, we'll draft a CAP letter to the agency. And then if the final audit report contains question costs that need to be reduced, we draft an issue memo for signature from our Caltrans Deputy Director, Chief Deputy Director, or our Director. And then once the agency has implemented all of the corrective actions and reimbursed question costs, a final determination letter is sent to the agency to close out the audit, which of course is our end goal. Next slide. So as this first step here, after receiving and reviewing the audit, we log data into our audits database. And the reason I bring this forward is over the past year, we've developed an audits database, in light of the quest for improving and modernizing our process and procedures. This database tracks and captures information such as audit recommendations, status of the audit responses, question costs, and notes when Caltrans communicates with stakeholders and agencies. Again, just a robust amount of communication with all of our partners to ensure that we all are doing our parts in good faith to resolve these audits. The database has brought tremendous efficiency in how we monitor audits. I'm really excited that my team has been able to develop this and put it forward for implementation. In fact, we're using it now. So with that, next slide. So really quick on CAP memo and CAP letter that I just went over in the overall flow here. CAP memo is addressed to our Audits and Investigation Office. The CAP letter, after all responses, is addressed to agencies. Now, in between that, as you can see, there's a lot of communication with many subject area experts. So really quick on the corrective action plan memo. Now, it consists of corrective actions that require the agency to implement. Again, we work with our district offices who are boots on the ground, who provide direct oversight to our agencies. Then we also work with our subject matter experts from all the functional areas within Caltrans relative to the complexity and the findings of these audits. The CAP memo is sent to, again, Audits Investigation for comments. And then after comments are received, like I mentioned, we draft a letter that's sent to the Public Works Director and Finance Director to really lead and be responsible for addressing the corrective actions. Now with that, I think the measure that we put in place and that assistance that we put in place is that we immediately schedule a conference to discuss the expectation of the corrective actions with the agencies. And typically they're due within 5 months. Because as you see, the question cost collection does take some time. With the conference, with this additional step of holding the conference, it helps us perform the oversight and monitor of local agencies, but really, also setting expectations, assistance, guidance. As noted, just because audit findings are documented as well as, the actions are collaborated on and really vetted, there is still that need for communication with the agency to ensure that there is an understanding. So we definitely really take a concerted effort to do so. And then the local agency is responsible to begin developing the corrective actions. And of course, that leads into our monitoring process. That from there, they train their employees as needed. Again, put payment plans for reimbursements as needed. I'll explain that in the slides to come. Next slide. All right, going to the validation, and adjusting costs. Now, the final audit reports from Independent Office of Audits and Investigation may recommend for Caltrans to seek reimbursement of question costs from local agencies. IOAI requires Caltrans to determine if the audit findings are valid and if funds should be reimbursed to Caltrans. Again, we communicate and work with the agencies, Caltrans stakeholders, subject matter experts to validate these costs. Now, real briefly, do want to touch, this is definitely not all-inclusive. I mean, there are other measures that we put in place, but for the sake of time, we went on ahead to illustrate 3 forms of validation of question costs. And that's number 1, agency substantiation. Now, the agencies have an opportunity to substantiate those question costs by providing new documentation and/or details, and we work with them on that. There's what we call programmatic solutions. So in 2014, a process review was performed and discovered a high level of noncompliance across many local agencies for A&E consultant procurement and contract management. Now, it was determined that local assistance guidance, oversight, and training was lacking in these areas. So instead of sanctioning agencies randomly selected for audits for a known statewide issue, Federal Highways agreed for us to not recover question costs. Instead, a proactive measure were required to implement a cap to improve guidance, oversight, and training for A&E consultant procurement and contract management. As a result, we created an A&E oversight branch, a complete revision of our Chapter 10 consultant procurements. This is from our manual. And, we do in-person webinars as well as the on-demand trainings to agencies in every Caltrans district. What I do want to highlight is because of this program and the approach to kind of cast a more programmatic solution, we increased our compliance from 49% in 2014 to 77% in 2017. I'll touch real quick on reconciliation reimbursements. Now, Caltrans, we also have an opportunity to reconcile costs, typically indirect cost rates billed incorrectly, and DLA we determine if we overpaid the agencies, and we'll get that reconciled. So as you can see, again, not all inclusive. These are some measures. Combined, these 3 measures or these 3 methods really, it takes a pretty robust process to reach a conclusion for the validation of question costs. Just want to touch briefly on just want to touch briefly. I won't go into some of the issue memos, but really quick on issue memos. If when all said and done, and we do our full discovery with, again, all of our parties, there are instances in cases where we suggest a reduced cost. And when that's the case, we do involve our chief deputy director if it's less than or equal to 100,000, and then our director signs off for requests greater than 100,000. It doesn't happen often, but it does, there are just a small amount, just to give you an idea, the last 5 years, the data that you see, I believe there's like 109 total audits. Of those total audits, we generated 7. So that equates to about 6.5%. I mean, we do everything we can to not only balance the proactive piece of audits, but to also, and that's kind of like front loading this, but also to be, to be stewards and have oversight for these projects and be accountable to that. Next slide, please. Okay, and the end goal. the final determination letters. So once the agency has implemented all of the corrective actions and reimbursed question costs, again, our end goal is to close out these audits. Local assistance, we definitely carry the lion's share of audits for local transportation projects. And so again, we put together and make this good faith effort to see all of this through with their local agencies in our districts. Okay, next slide. So I think to the more, I guess, silver lining, the more positive aspect of audits, we're always, as a division, part of a greater program and a part of a greater enterprise. We do everything we can to really not stop with just monitoring, but take on the responsibility and the engagement to continue to improve. So in May 2021, just a few months ago, we did revise our guidance chapter. And then the idea here is to really clarify and in many ways emphasize roles, expectations, responsibilities during these audits, after these audits, and we also included sanctions. Now, with the intention, with sanctions, it's definitely the intentions of sanctions is kind of like the last resort. But we do understand that we have to put sanctions in place and to ensure, like you said, like everybody has stressed here, that future funding is either withheld or not authorized, if you will. So with that, I think I'll go to the next slide on continuous improvement. So in addition to updating manuals as trends occur and, you know, as we do further discovery, there's a lot of learning lessons and best practices that develop over time. And we want to make sure we capture that. We want to make sure we communicate that. We want to make sure we document that as a way to assist our partners and agencies. So what can we perform to prevent future audit findings from occurring? Again, I mentioned we built an audits database that has brought on a lot of efficiencies internally, but as efficient as we can internally to monitor and track and audits, it really benefits not only our department and our program, but I really think it benefits who we serve. To again, you know, even just taking trends to diagnose and address different deficient areas. This then kind of helps us hone in on training and really kind of make that engagement with our local agencies as fruitful as we can. We also continue to conduct process reviews. For example, we perform construction oversight field reviews, where local agencies are assisted with any processes they perform that are out of compliance. Now, these process reviews help us provide oversight, but it also helps, you know, bring local agencies into compliance. We also, in coordination with federalized districts and CTC staff, we developed a risk-based program. So at the programmatic level and at the project level, we know that it is quite, I wouldn't say impossible, but quite difficult to oversee a portfolio of 4,000 active projects at any given time. But we do have to continue to practice this risk-based approach to the oversight of our programs. So with that, once our risks are identified for process reviews and other needs, we develop additional guidance and implement statewide training as a direct result from our observations of monitoring and oversight to bring local agencies into compliance. We developed, I think what I want to highlight today, those are things that I think we've been practicing way before I joined the division. And I think I've got the honor to really kind of move the team forward and look at even more creative ways that we can provide an upper customer service, right? And not only through audits, but I think it's front end, that you know, that concerted, focused effort. I mean, what do we put in place that we're capturing this and that we're mediating these findings, that we can decrease these findings? So we developed a very robust, we're calling it the Agency Certification Project Program. Now the program is, again, a proactive approach to increase the agency's ability to deliver projects. This allows us to kind of work with them more hand in hand, almost like a deeper dive in assessing areas like staffing qualifications mandatory training, required program documents, and many times looking at our audits findings. Some of the common audit findings is really kind of like a deficient project delivery or financial systems. So going there hand in hand with our district's subject matter experts and our local agencies to really understand what are some of these root causes. So it's a very engaging program, and we're definitely looking to implement the program. Gosh, 2022 is in a few months, and we're starting with the volunteered agencies. And then from there, I mean, it's kind of like our beta test, if you will, work out the kinks. From there in 2023, we'll begin certifying the rest of our local programs or agencies. I'm really looking forward to, the more progressive, I think, measures to help us with our endeavor, to really help us with, again, that balance. And I'll kind of throw this out, and I've heard this, and, I've really thought to this, is that balance between the level of policing and the level of assisting. So I think with that, I conclude my presentation. I'm open for questions. I do have my audits branch chief, Daniel Burke, and our assistant division chief, Mark Samuelson, who have obviously, between the two, have dabbled into audits way deeper than I have, but I'm honored.
Well, thank you. We are honored to have you here, and we want to thank you for such a thorough presentation. I think it really covered the gamut and showed that you're focusing on a results-based process and really comprehensive and collaborative, that you don't want to see this be punitive, but really about improving processes together. So I think it's quite thorough. Justin, I believe that we have no public comment on this item. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair Norton, that is correct.
And commissioners, are there any comments that you have on this item? If not, this is an information item. We are really appreciative of this great presentation, and we want to thank you for coming today and being so thorough in how you explained the vision of the local audit process. So thank you very much. And with that, it's 11:37. I am going to have us take a short break till 11:50 and then come back and finish the balance of our agenda. Thank you.